Welcome to the Dance Centre podcast. I am your host, Claire French, and I'm joining you from the traditional unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish and Tsleil-Waututh peoples, also known as Vancouver, Canada. I'll be talking to dancers, choreographers and other members of the dance world here on the West Coast to find out more about their creative work and practices and to discuss what it means to us to be dance professionals today. Thanks for joining us. Born in Manila, in the Philippines, Alvin Tolentino immigrated to Canada in 1983. He's based in the unceded ancestral territories of the Coast Salish peoples of the Squamish, Musqueam and Tsleil-Waututh nations, also known as Vancouver. His professional arts and dance training includes the Royal Winnipeg Ballet, York University Toronto, SUNY Purchase and the Limon Institute in the US. He continues to grow with ongoing artistic collaboration, relations and liaison with prominent dance artists and arts educators across the nation and abroad. Sought after an established virtuoso dance interpreter, Tolentino has continued to receive critical praise as a dancer for his outstanding interpretations of his own works, along with some of Canada's finest choreographers and dance companies. In 2000, Tolentino founded Co.ERASGA, a dance company dedicated to the research, creation and presentation of contemporary dance with an emphasis on exploration and collaboration with diverse artists nationally and abroad. With extensive international tours and artistic collaborations, Tolentino has featured dance works across the world. In 2010, Alvin was awarded the Vancouver Mayor's Arts Award for Dance in recognition of his contributions to the field and to Vancouver's cultural communities. And in 2018, he received the Explore Asian Pan-Asian Award for contribution in the arts and multiculturalism. You can find out more at Co.ERASGAdance.ca. I'm joined by Alvin Tolentino, Artistic Director and co-founder of Co.ERASGA Dance, or Co.ERASGA Dance. So much to talk about. I believe it's 20 years of the company. And that in itself is a whole podcast or a whole series of podcasts. I'm sure we could go there too. However, for today and for this particular podcast, I thought we could go pre-Co.ERASGA and find out a little bit more about the man behind the company and also bring us right up to date with what the company is doing and what Alvin is doing and Alvin's perspectives and philosophies or principles for the company, but just around art making and collaboration, interdisciplinary work, Indigenous influence. There's so much. So I need to help Alvin out here a little bit to start this. And welcome, Alvin. Hello, and please say hello if you would like to listen.
Hello, Claire. Lovely to be here with you.
How did it all start for you? Like, we could go as far back as your training and your early days, but I am interested in some of your experiences pre-company to start us off. So that's probably also a long time period, but could you give us
if I still remember them?
If you still remember, I'll make it up for us. It's fine.
Or if I don't want to remember that. No, I mean, I really started as an independent dance artist, and most of my training really were back east at York University because I was a student of York University, and I've done a lot of also studies at the Limon Institute, and I was at SUNY Purchase also, and spent a lot of time in Montreal because that's where a lot of the big names, contemporary dance artists at that time, we're looking at really early 90s, right? And then I was also a student of the Royal Winnipeg Ballet. So I spent some time in the prairies, for a couple of years in Winnipeg, being part of the Royal Winnipeg Ballet. So I'm somewhat of an alumni of the classic institution.
Absolutely.
And then I went back to the West Coast and done some training at SFU when SFU dance school or faculty was still up in the mountain, Burnaby Mountain, yeah. And so they used to do this summer school where they would bring all dance artists and teachers from across the lands and, have a wonderful summer session. And so that's really where things kind of sort of shifted for me, because I think Lola McClellan saw me and she approached me to possibly work with her and do some research work. And I agreed to do that. And she invited me to basically be part of the creation that she was doing. And so from then on, I just became a real Vancouver independent dance artist
Yeah.
and really started to work for all the big companies, like Kokoro Dance, Kinesis Dance, Jennifer Mescal. I was with Edam. And so, all the big companies, I was really supporting and dancing for them. And I did that for a good decade, a good 10 years before I really decided to shift into having a company. And I think the main reason for that was that I was really exhausted being an interpreter for all these choreographers, which of course I honor and I love and I've learned so much. But I think you can only take on so much as an independent dance artist when you're moving from one choreographer to another in the course of a 3 day. Like sometimes I would rehearse for three companies. So that was quite a strenuous for the mind and the body and the soul, really. So I've decided that maybe I need to do something else. And also at that time, I was also making my own work already, and I think that was very important. That
Yeah.
was really a signifying idea for what might happen in the future, and looking into that. But I mean, I nobody told me how to create a company. Nobody told me about how to build a nonprofit. So none of that, none of
No.
that. You're not trained for that.
Yeah, what I love about this is I arrived in Vancouver in 1997. So I was just at the tail end of the summer school up on the hill in Burnaby
Right.
Mountain, but I did my master's degree from the hill. So I was up in Burnaby too, right? So my experience of SFU and the MFA, which is what I moved here for, is all Burnaby Mountain, those shacks, the little kind of huts at the end of the world, at the end of the world, at the end of the world for me, coming from London.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I remember you being one of the independent dancers of
Yeah.
the city.
Yeah.
And I knew a little bit about your history, but I knew you as a dancer and as a force as a dancer for all of these companies because I saw you in all of the companies. And this happens sometimes, it still happens, where the same dancers appear in works with with the same companies, and they can't help but become part of the aesthetic of a city, I believe. But I also think what you're talking about, it doesn't surprise me that you started to create your own work, or that you maybe always had that passion. And I think that's also was a draw for choreographers to work with you, because there was a sense of how strongly and you took the role of interpreter. Because I think to be strong in the role of interpretation, you are also choreographing and you are also creating. And you are
Absolutely.
also giving so generously of your own ideas.
Yeah.
And so I see that a lot. And of course, there's burnout. If you're giving that to a lot of different companies, you're having to adapt your own, vision in each of these circumstances, but also your own training all the time for the different needs of the
Absolutely.
choreographers.
Yeah.
So no wonder there's burnout, but I'm also extremely happy to hear. And I think it will be lovely for lots of younger up-and-coming dancers who find themselves in the same position as you, working for all of these people, 3 or 4 people a day, that maybe there's an inkling there, a gut instinct to be dance makers with their own ideas, with their own setup. And as scary as that might sound, you are testament to the fact that it can be extremely successful. You're also an amazing model, I think, in this city, especially for producing and
Yeah.
presenting other people's work and mentoring works, or giving people an opportunity to show their work, whatever stage it's at. So was that something you decided once you had the organization umbrella that you wanted to offer? Like, where is that something you've always wanted to do, or how do you
I
think that came about?
I think that really came about with being an independent dance artist and a creator, because there's just so much pathways towards creation. And
Yeah.
sometimes I think what's overlooked is what's behind the scene and what are the processes and what are the stages, which I found very interesting as an interpreter and as an interpreter and also as a creator. And those stages are so imperative to the final creation. If there is such a thing as final creation or production, what happens to the in-between spaces of the art's making, and also to the fact that you won't always have all the resources to be able to dream big, to put your production. So I thought about, well, if I make a short solo, then I should have the possibility to exercise to share that to my audience, to the public, right? So how do you do that? And so the challenges, I think, really provided me the kind of formula to make sure that within the work that I'm doing, but also for the other works of the people that I know, my peers and the artists that I work with, the different generation that I have encountered, because I realize that they're in the same shoes as I am.
Yeah.
So many people want to make work, but some are not really fully ready. Some are still in progress. But how do you go about that? But there's something very important about sharing those progress, those process, because they're part of the development. It's also very insightful, I think, for the artist to present those raw spaces of a creation so that there's information that a creator cannot access to all the time by himself or herself, right, in the studio. Those are so important, and we don't often talk about those, and we don't often integrate them into the practice. And I think more and more there's a little bit of that, but back then it's not really, so.
No, it's relatively new, I think, but I also think that there's something about, and I think you do this in spades, like you make sure there's a component of, it seems, all of the projects you do where there's a sense of sharing with an audience, where artists can share with an audience, like you just said, to learn from, to garner information from people outside of the process that can then inform the more steps of the process. And I think what's really lovely about that is then when you talk about final, or if you say like the final performance, or when it's finally ready for an audience, there's something about it marking chapters or like stages of research and not being afraid to share something that may not be finished. The objective to have something to share with people is also about being ready to articulate what it is you're interested in. And then you can refine your vision, right? It's all about refining practice at the same time. And I know that you're really big on that. But I think the other thing that I'd love to talk to you about is, how did you find such a strong thread for collaborating with international artists and with interdisciplinary artists? Because I think for 20 years you've been doing that. And I think this is just wonderful, because again, it's another push for, you say you can always dream big, right? You can't always pull it off in terms of resources or funding, but you've always found a way to maintain an idea outside of it being provincial even, or outside of it being, there's always this international global sense of what you present. So could you talk a little bit about that maybe?
Well, it's a question that's been asked before. And I think for me, the aspect of collaboration for me is really about the stage of learning. Like that's one of the key ways that I continue to kind of educate myself about the practice, and that is from collaborating with other people and other artists that lives in different culture, because that's so enriching. People that come from South America or Europe or Asia, they all bring something that's somewhat similar to where I am in my practice, but also very different because they come from very different backgrounds. And so that really interests me. And I find that collaboration is so challenging that I'm actually really drawn to that challenge. I know that's probably crazy to say, but there's something about when you have to really let go of your ego so that the art can survive or can have a present, and you do that through collaboration, because in collaboration you really have to integrate together. That's just the real human kind of connection that you have to do with people. And also part of that also, I think, is that my belief with the artist to artist network. I think there's a lot of ways to expand one's creativity by working with not so much the big institution, but to other independent dance artists who's in the same field as I am, who's trying to connect so that they can find a space or another avenue so that they can bring their work to another place,
Yeah.
and that artist to artist network has been there for the longest time, beyond the aspect of touring, beyond the aspect of international exchanges. The artist to artist network, I think, has always been there from the very beginning. Our sense of wanting to work with other people is I think part of the puzzle that's always been there. It's just that we don't think of that so much in the arts, but I think it's always there, helping other artists with the same
Yeah.
vision as you do. And I find that very helpful, because I've had a lot of opportunities to also come to bigger institution, but it's such a different approach. You have to be business minded. You have to have a product, and sometimes that's not really the pathways that you want. You just want to learn something new. And sometimes the best way to do it is just to collaborate with another artist that you don't know, right?
Yeah, and then you're practicing, right? The thing is that practicing your art making, being in process with others is part of, and I think this is something maybe we've both learned from institutional models where you are in group creation processes quite often, so that there's just an innate understanding that by being in the room and in a studio with other people, you are learning by osmosis from those other
From
bodies,
those
those
artists,
other
yeah.
minds, those other interpretations. And once you have that, and once you have that in a positive manner, you don't want it to go out of your life, right? You need to create opportunities.
Yeah, yeah. It's life change. I find it life changing, and it's very personal. And that's the kind of learning and method that is not taught. You practice that through collaboration. It's just like community. It's just like working in the community. It's very collaborative, and that's letting go of the ego and really going deep into a personal level in order to understand the other culture, the other person.
Yeah, so I think this is interesting because there is a crossover there that you just alluded to in terms of collaborating on artistic works for performance, and then community collaboration where you're collaborating with community organizations or community partners or just members of a community who wouldn't necessarily call themselves artists. But from my experience of some of the things you've done over the last 2 decades that I've come into as an observer, if you like, or a loose participant, like coming in to watch kind of a stage of a process or something with community partners, I've always found that those community partners are artists. Like, there's a sense of the way that you work and the way that you work with them is to bring out their artistry or to bring out their sense of artists of themselves. And I think that's also where they come because they know
Yeah.
that you'll do that with them. And I've always been taken by how you have done that personally and your collaborators have done that. And so there is something in who you choose to work with and who you choose to bring that I think is really important. Can you talk a little bit about that? Maybe how you've met these people that you want to further connect with, or whether it's an instinct for you to
Well,
bring
I
them.
think I think sometimes there are artists that I have just followed over time and really
Mm.
understand how deep their work are in terms of their creativity, but also their positioning to the community. And that really interests me because it gives me a perspective about where else does dance can be shared and can breathe, and how else beyond the aspect of staging or being in the studios. So there's so many interesting artists across the world that are doing that. And an example of that is Santi Smith. whom I have followed for the longest time. And I really just, I thought that the work that she does is so special, the concept of arts and land-based
Land-based.
practice, and so I've just observed it over time, but I don't really know Santi that well. I've just known her as an artist. But I told her that I want to have the courage to just tell you that I want you to come to Vancouver and just share your work. I mean, she's been here before. She's been presented to our community several times, but just to have that collaborative and get to know her personally gives me a kind of a clear connection, and to really understand, okay, that's why I'm drawn to this artist, is because of the kind of work that she does. It's very specific.
I find it's great. I was just going to say that that allows for as well, if you're connecting on a deeper level than watching a performance of somebody and actually being able to engage with them, is also you can address your own assumptions about that person's work.
That's right.
As well, So
That's right. Yeah.
with them. Yeah. So sorry, I interrupted you, but
So I think there's something about knowing an artist and not knowing them at the same time, but having the interest, the kind of vision that they have for dance, and that I get drawn by that. I get drawn by that possibility, because that's part of the learning. That's part of the expansion of learning and educating myself in terms of how else can you move dance to something bigger, something that I've not encountered before.
So how do you go about choosing your dancers for your productions? Like, do you audition for people, or is it more a sense of, I know, because there are, like you said in the beginning, there are so many different pathways into creation. And I think in that same way, there are so many, we have to be careful about who we cast and who we work with for our visions, right? It's contingent upon performers or our collaborators understanding the work in a way, not necessarily understanding for you and me, not necessarily understanding our perspective on the work, but having a deep sense of the work and a deep understanding for themselves. So, I mean, you've probably had lots of different models. You've probably tried everything.
Well, I think I'm really an observer. Like, I watch dancers, and and occasionally I would come to school shows and just observe who's out there. So I do watch who's upcoming, and also sometimes I just have an innate feeling about it, that this could be the possible dancer to work with, and sometimes I think it's not a quick exchange. It could take a long time, and I have had that. I mean, some of the dancers that I work with have been with me for, I don't know, 4 or 5 years, so there is a kind of a developmental period of getting to know each other, the language, the vocabulary, the aesthetic, the ideas, how I work in the space. But no, it's hard. It's hard to find the dancers to interpret the work. Yeah, it's not easy.
I think it's important. I feel it's important for younger dancers, or maybe starting out dancers. Maybe they've danced already for 15 years in professional capacities in a certain context, but then suddenly to be in the contemporary dance making environment. It's also opportunity for dancers to get to know choreographers and how they work. I think it's really important for that perspective to be in the room, but I think it's also room for the dancer to get to know the choreographers, and get to know the work, and if it's what they want, in their own lives.
Yeah.
So I think it's a beautiful thing to take the pressure off it being a gig, and I'm now a successful dancer because I work for so and so. It's a time to learn.
Yeah, and I have encouraged in the past to have apprentices to come in the space. from early on, we've had exchanges with much younger dancers that can just be in the space, learn the vocabulary, learn the research, and be there with us. And whether they end up actually performing it one day, there's something about that process that's really important, right?
So there's that level, and then your collaborators tend to be more mature artists who I would say are your peers across the board,
the board, yeah.
Flamenco, Cassandra,
yeah. I mean the collaboration with Cassandra is the same thing. I mean, we've known each other for so long, but I think it was the right timing because she's really interested in really moving into the aspect of collaboration, but also like just really thinking about the possibility of flamenco to move into this new hybrid practice,
absolutely.
Right?
Yeah,
expression.
Absolutely. Yeah. And of course, I'm actually working with the flamenco community quite a bit with the International Flamenco Festival and Flamenco Rosario. So, of course, flamenco is a contemporary art form. And as well as being in its traditional kind of cultural form, which remains, and separate to Spanish classical dance. So I wonder if we could bring that back around to your history and your interest in, do you have interest in Filipino dance traditions?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I started, I immigrated to Canada in 1983. And so I already had some training in Filipino cultural dances before I arrived to Canada. So that's really kind of my first encounter with dance. And so that has remained quite an interest to me for the longest time. But not so much about the classic of the Filipino cultural dances, but more so about, I think, the history of indigenous practices that are integral to those dances and how they came about, how they're rooted and related to the community, to the indigenous community, and how then came about to form into something that's for a dance. Right, because there's such deep history with indigenous and how the relationship of dance and indigenous practice and what that is, because dance is a kind of a ritual for indigenous practices, and so it's not that word dance is not really, it may not exist as dance as we know it. It may be more than that. It may be a spiritual thing. And so that is really the place that I am really very interested and continuing to learn and to understand what that is, the mystery of that indigenous relationship to that kind of practice of body moving for something greater than who we are and this thing around us.
And in appreciation of
everything,
aspects of the culture and
of the culture of everything, right? Of
and
everything.
Communion.
Of communion, community, people, the reciprocity of what we receive from the land and how that's celebrated, and how people are, the idea of the gift and receiving it,
What resonates with me is this idea of there is no people audience necessary for that kind of
practice.
It's actually in almost the practitioner is also the audience.
The audience
is also the one who is like you said, receiving, but also creating that moment with, in relation with. That's given me a lot of room and scope to continue to practice actually as a dancer. Most recently, that's been the thing that I've been like, oh, I value this and I am so grateful and appreciative that I can and that I have this knowledge and it's so much part of me that I have to express it and I have to honor it. And so that's brought me to a different place as a dancer or as a dance artist, which I'm
Mm-hmm.
extremely excited by at the moment, because it's thrilling. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm so grateful for that side. I'd love to talk about what's coming up for you, because as usual, you have an you
I
have an
know.
entire, like, you know how to do seasons, like, and you know how to have an annual program, like going back to this idea of not necessarily institution, but honoring the fact that you have Co.ERASGA and dance. You do so much in a year, in a kind of season, if you like.
I know, for a small company like us, yes, I know. It's
Yeah,
quite a
and it's
hectic season. Yeah. Yeah.
exactly, and it's, but just concentrating on Co.ERASGA, then already I was able to enjoy only one of Alvin Colantis classes as artist in residence for you. That was wonderful. Gaga class. Loved it. Wish I could have gone to more. But you also have a world premiere of Accumulation coming up. And you do have something coming up, I believe, at Scotiabank Dance Centre, which is more of a symposium. But first, let's talk a little bit about Accumulation, which I believe will be at Performance Works in November on Granville Island.
Yeah.
Would you like to talk a little bit about that work?
Well, this is a new creation for company. That's really a project that that was postponed because of COVID, as you know.
Oh,
So I'm
yeah.
still in the recovery phase because this is a project that should have been completed in 2020 and should have been touring by now. But all of that got canceled, and so here we are. 3 years after, and we're just ready to premiere a piece of work. Basically,
Excellent.
yeah. And so this is a Canada France project with my longtime French composer collaborator Emmanuel Meilly, and then we're also working with the renowned French sculptor Marc Guerenton. It's an environmental arts project. It's really about responding to where we are right now with what's going on and the crucial time for our ecology and with the many devastating things that's happening across the lands. And, this is not new for me. I mean, I've done work that's based on this since the beginning. But I think more than ever, this is so much more relevant, so relevant right now. And so just really asking the question that how can we as artists and how can dance move into that kind of expression and creation? How can dance be a kind of an ambassador for nature and the kind of crisis that we're facing? How can we face that as artists? I love this quote that is by Robin Wall Kimmerer. I don't know if you know her. She's the author of Braiding Sweetgrass, and she asked the question of one of her lecture is what does the earth ask of us? So that's been a kind of a really poignant um, quote that is kind of generating my relationship with this work. And I'll just lead to that, and I'll let the audience kind of make a decision to
Yeah.
that question. What does the earth ask of us?
Yeah, I think I came across that quote through you, though, via you on Facebook.
Yeah,
So I
yeah,
think you posted it. So
yeah,
I was like, that's familiar, but I think it's still through you that it's familiar
yeah.
to me. And I also think what's wonderful is that this is, again, back to the intergenerational aspect of, and how important that is for you, because what also makes it contemporary and timely is that the dancers themselves are bringing an understanding of what it means to be dancers in this climate, in this environment, addressing those very issues from their core at the time that they're starting their training. It's so much an issue of our time that they are very much part of that decision making around it and choice making
Choice
around
making.
how we handle it. Yeah. So you also have a symposium, I
Yeah,
believe, coming up.
yeah. This is a symposium that will be in partnership with the Dance Center and Raven Spirit Dance and Co.ERASGA. So it's a tri-organizing partners. This is a symposium that is built by Sabma Bungu, company Netya Netya from Montreal. This is a traveling symposium entitled Not Just Dance. It's really just gathering artists of colors, artists that we may not have had connection with, but are really integral into the milieu, into the development, and into the fibers of what makes dance and what else is dance, not just dance. What else is dance? So it's really for everyone to commune together, to have a discussion, to provoke ideas, to question and to ask people's practices and to share it in a room. And the Dance Center is really grateful to be hosting this. And we'll do that for November 24th and 25th. So it's coming up. And it'll be open to the public, of course. So it's something to look forward to. So, and as you know, this is such an important time for all of us. This context of cultural shifting and really asking the question of what else is dance? Who does dance belong to? Who does art belong to? It's so important. If there's something that COVID really brought us, is that reflection of what is our relationship to the practice? What does it mean, right? How can we expand it, or what is it in our personal relationship?
And I think also, I think there's opportunity. What have we missed?
What have we missed? Yeah.
What have we missed about what it is or could be? I'm thinking of there are books like Rewriting History, where the perspective on, to think about not taking a Eurocentric Western, perspective on contemporary dance and shift it and looking elsewhere through history for what dance is, rewrites
from the beginning of time.
From the beginning of time, it rewrites
from the beginning of time. Yeah.
And then there's the other side, which is but what is your perspective? What do you value about that issue? What's resonating with you about that? And we have the opportunity as artists to delve into that. And I think it's a privilege to have that, and to even recognize that we can do that with our lives is a wonderful thing.
Yeah, and I think also this context of open discussion, and really the aspect of sharing and opening and allowing the vulnerability to be shared, that's something that I find really special at this time, and to let people have a space and to voice. I think that's something that we need to really encourage,
Yeah, because we might be like-minded artists, but we don't think the same.
No.
And we don't create the same work, and it's very important that we don't. and so I think there's a lot around that that's what I think partly maybe what I mean by what's missing from the dialogue around art making. It brings back to what you were saying in the very beginning. But just that whole thing about different pathways to creation, but there's also different actualizations of the work, and there's different stages of work that I think we sometimes don't talk about enough, like you said.
Yeah.
Okay, this has been wonderful, Alvin. There's a lot more we could perhaps talk about, but I think we'll save it for another podcast, maybe. The traveling symposium, I love the idea of. I've always had this vision of it.
Isn't that amazing? Yeah. So really, this is from the great minds of Sab, and she's done it first in Montreal, and she's thrilled that it's moving to Vancouver, and her hope and goal is for it to travel across the globe. I thought what a wonderful way to really go deep into another's community, but through.
So did you say Sab?
Sab, yeah, Sab Mabungu.
Mabungu, yeah. Well, this has been a pleasure. I'm so glad that your accumulation is finally happening. So, dates?
November 9, 10, and 11. Thank you so much, Claire. Thank you so much. Thank you for discussing. Yeah, wonderful to have all of these podcasts happening.
Yeah, isn't it great? I love it.
It's great.
I'm grateful for in life.
It's great.
Okay. See you soon.
Okay, keep well.
Thank you. Thank you so much for listening. We would love for you to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts, as this will help other listeners find us and help us to grow our dance audience. We'll be back next month. In the meantime, you can follow us on Facebook at The Dance Centre, Twitter at Dance Centre, and Instagram at The Dance Centre BC. And if you'd like to support our work, please consider making a donation. Just go to our website at thedancecentre.ca, where you'll find extensive information about our upcoming programs and events. The music for the Dance Centre podcast was composed by James B. Maxwell. Always a pleasure to connect with you through dance. Until next time.